Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Liam's First Look, and this week we're actually coming at you early in the week for a first look. I'm excited to get back to work like normal. We've been swamped with these last couple of weeks, a ton of fights, a ton of cancellations. And speaking of which, guys, breaking news right off the hop. We got our guy Dixon in the chat informing us that Cole Shelton is reporting we have a cancellation right off the rip. Cody Garbrandt is out against Miles John. So Dixon and Cole Shelton breaking news right now on the show. Appreciate you guys doing so. So we got plenty of great fights to discuss, right? We're talking about UFC Vegas 100. It's going down at the Apex Center. And guys, we got coffee brewing. Cheers to you guys. If you're having a coffee with me, God bless you for it. If you're having something else, then I wish you nothing but the best, guys. What we're going to do on this show, like we always do on the first look, is we're going to talk about this fight card from the top all the way on down to the bottom. We're going to give our first impression of these fights. We're going to see if there's anything that jumps out off the rip from an analytical standpoint. And then we're going to see, if we could dig into these fights a little bit more. Hopefully we don't have any more cancellations, right? We've already lost 2 fights. Nicholas Dalby is out. Cody Garbrandt is out. But we've got plenty of action to discuss. And the 100th event in the Apex Center, none other than Carlos Prates in the main event. And what I've noticed is if you put out a tweet about Carlos Prates, this shit's doing numbers, right? The community loves this guy, Carlos Prates, right now, and for good reason. It's reflected in the betting markets as well. This guy is, captivating the audience. Now, are there some concerns? Always, right? When you talk about a minus 800 favorite in MMA, what could go wrong? Anything. The guy throws one kick, hurts his leg, falls over sideways, and you're crying in your coffee. But when you talk about overall what we're looking at here with Carlos Prates, Dana White looked at this kid one time on Contender Series. And if you guys know how that show works, he doesn't watch these guys before they get to the show. He doesn't do any real scouting. He says, one night you have one chance to impress me. And then after he watches him fight, he says, this guy's like a young Anderson Silva. Very high praise. Obviously, he said the same thing about Uriah Hall. It's not going to work out for everybody. But you look at Carlos Prates, what stands out about this guy? He's got a ton of experience coming into the UFC. So if we look at his record, we're going to pull this up right now via Tapology. And I'll share my screen here with you guys so you have an idea of what we're talking about. We've got the nightmare, Carlos Prates, right? And he looks like an intimidating guy. He's got Muay Thai on the chest, 26 professional mixed martial arts fights, 3-0 in the UFC, 2-1 in one championship, 2-0 in the LFA. And like I mentioned before, 1-0 on the Contender Series, got signed right away. You look at what we're dealing with in terms of this guy's career. He goes out there and he beats the Leech, Li Jingliang, a guy who's very respected, a guy who's a long-term veteran of the sport, coming back from a long layoff. And he just got absolutely delivered, right? He had nothing to offer, unfortunately, to a guy like Carlos Prates. And they exchanged some shots, right? They both were willing to throw. They both were willing to exchange. But you had a young man who knew he could rely on his chin, who knew he could walk him down pressure. And you just saw that ultimately a guy who's very tough, a guy who's normally, a rock solid durability type guy in the Leech, he was getting wobbled. He was getting stung. He was getting off balance. And you just see Prates is a killer, man. He picks his shots very well. He'll mix it up. He'll go to the head. He'll go to the body. He'll use his long legs. He'll use his knees. He'll use those elbows. He'll use his punches. You see a lot of effective tools and effective offense from Carlos Prates, and that's why people like to watch this guy fight, right? Aside from the aura, aside from the cigarettes, aside from the vibe, my man's out there drinking and smoking, chilling, doing his thing. When you watch the guy fight, he's very intentional, right? There's the party lifestyle on the outside. And then on the inside of the cage, does he always make the defensively responsible choice? No. But does he always make the violent, explosive, looking to deal damage choice? Yeah, he always does that. And you look at this guy, he's having a lot of success as a result. The Charles Radtke fight, guys, that was sinister. If you go back and watch that, it's one of the most brutal knockouts you'll see from a body shot in the UFC. He hits him to the body, and this guy collapses in a heap, rolling around on the ground, holding that liver. And you just saw Prates gets you thinking about up here, right? He's very busy with the hands, making you watch up top, and then he kills you with the knee to the body. The guy's special with that offense on the feet. I don't think there's any two ways about that. When you look at the Trevin Giles fight, we just saw Mike Malott go out there and put on a very tepid performance, a very milquetoast performance out there, maybe touch a little with the jab here and there. It's been tough for some guys to look good against Trevin Giles. They needed a big moment of success. And meanwhile, you watch this guy, Carlos Prates, and he's able to take him out with the quickness, right? Second round knockout, and he put him down badly in that fight. Do you see Giles land the jab in every fight? Yes, he's sharp with that. He's got good tools. But what you also see is Giles can't go when the fight gets extended in those pocket exchanges. He doesn't want to be there. So if you're Mike Malott and you want to stand on the outside and neither one of you throws all night, he's content to just pick away with that jab once every 30 seconds and call it a night. Whereas meanwhile, you see this guy Carlos Prates building into his offense, showing a little bit more layers over time and opening up, using the boxing, using the kicks. And I think that's why we saw him have a ton of success. Now, you look at the Mitch Ramirez fight, and frankly, I think that, that's an understandable, setup type win for Carlos Prates, right? That's a fight that seemed like a good opportunity for him. You look at the fact he was supposed to fight Vanilto Antunes on the regional scene. I believe that guy got a shot on Contender, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to go back and look why I know that name. But in any case, the important thing to note here is this guy was on the regional scene prior to that, and he had some real fights. If you look at when he was losing a lot of these fights, we go back on his Tapology. I think this is important, right? He last lost back in 2019. So he's been on a pretty notable win streak. And go ahead and take a look at this for me, guys. 25 years of age. So this guy hasn't lost since he was 25. The last guy he lost to was an undefeated fighter, Gaji Murad Abdullayev. So no slouches for Carlos Prates, right? You look back, he lost via stoppage back in 2017, right? The last time he was stopped in a fight. And this guy, first of all, he looks like a serious guy, just on Tapology, right? You would look at this guy. Then you look at the fact that he was just 23 years of age, very young. And I think that, Tristan says Ramirez is a random jobber. Yeah, I don't think that's a great win, right? But what I'm talking about is you look at this guy's losses in the past, they weren't horrible losses. And the last time he was finished in a fight, he was 23 years of age. So obviously he's taken on some pretty serious opponents in the interim, right? He's gone out there and competed. Charles Oliveira, not the same one that we all know and love, but he's going out there and fighting guys that have records on the regional scene, and he's putting it on the line, right? I think that this guy, Carlos Prates, is very comfortable inside the octagon. And then the thing that also stands out about him, right? Fighting nerds. We know one thing is that the fighting nerds have been having a tremendous amount of success inside the octagon lately. Flavio Alvaro is the coach over there. And then you're looking at Thiago Moises moved his camp and his operation over there to try and, benefit from their success. Caio Barajo, the natural, maybe one or two fights away from a serious, opportunity, maybe at the middleweight title, right? This guy's been putting on great fights. Gene Silva, another guy who's getting a ton of love and respect in the UFC after having some success, and he's another fighting nerd. So the fighting nerds, I believe Eduardo Mora as well, off the top of my head, they're just putting a lot of fighters into the UFC lately, and they've been doing a great job. So when I look at this fight on paper, I say to myself, man, they're definitely setting up a guy that they love in Carlos Prates for a huge opportunity against the ultimate gatekeeper, right? We talk about a guy in Neil Magny, and Neil Magny is a very proven underdog. I tweeted this out the other day. If you want to talk about guys that have a proven trend at the window, right? Neil Magny is one of them. He's gone out 17 times as a UFC underdog. I mean, it's just a ridiculous amount of times to fight in the UFC, much less to go off as the underdog, right? People have had low expectations of Neil Magny, and sometimes he's lived down to those expectations. He's been a big dog and looked like every bit of a big dog. But there's been other times where he's a big dog like he was against Mike Malott, and he gets one advantageous position and he's able to close the show. So we know that Neil Magny is an opportunistic guy. I think he did the same thing against Daniel Rodriguez as an underdog. I think he was plus 680 or something like that to end the fight inside the distance, even as a welterweight. So when you talk about, okay, Steelman, the case for Neil Magny, he has a few things that are intangible to try and help you win MMA fights. I made what I thought was a pretty obvious and, straightforward point. And a lot of people gave me pushback on Twitter, on X. So I want to elaborate a little bit on it in this breakdown. But I said that Mike Malott is clearly better at every aspect of MMA, skill for skill. Yet when you look at the fight, he loses to Neil Magny. It's hilarious, right? It just goes to show why MMA is such a unique sport. And then a lot of people were getting on me saying, but cardio is so important and this is so important. Yeah, obviously it's so important. That's why he won the fight. But the whole point is there's skills, right? There's things that you could do, techniques, grappling. Do I know what to do? Do I know where to put my hands? Do I know how to get a takedown, right? And then there's also, can I do it for 15 minutes? Can I sustain the pace? Could I do it for 25 minutes if it's a title fight? These are the questions you have to ask, right? So there's first, do I have the skills? But then there's also, can I keep pushing? I think Neil Magny doesn't have the best MMA skills. You know, you look at the guy, and a lot of times when somebody has really good, you know, very clean MMA skills, they beat the shit out of Neil Magny, right? Whether it's RDA picking him up, taking him to the ground, and teaching him exactly what time it is in the mat, right? Gilbert Burns did the exact same thing. Take him down, step 1, step 2, step 3, and it's over, right? Like there's a lot of guys that have shown they have the jiu-jitsu prowess to embarrass Neil Magny in the first minute of the fight, 2 minutes of the fight, take him down and just own him position for position, strength for strength. Those are former lightweights, by the way. So yes, are they extremely skilled on the ground? Absolutely they are. But did they dominate him physically? Yes. You look at a guy like Ian Gary, didn't get the stoppage. He did everything but, right? He beat the tar out of his legs. And when you look at Neil Magny, it's a common culprit throughout his career. The guy just is a sucker to leg kicks. If you go out there and say, I'm going to kick this guy in the legs, you're going to kick him in the legs. You're going to do it 100 times. You know, he's not going to have a good answer. So you look, that's just a fact of his career, right? Maybe he changes it for this camp. If he does, I'd say, hey, hats off to him, right? Because he's a guy who's been around forever and he's never changed it. Lorenz Larkin absolutely torched him to the leg. Santiago Ponzinibbio torched him with the jab, but he also torched him with the kick to the calf. When you look back, there's been a lot of guys that did it. Ian Gary kicked him all over the place. The referee could have intervened at some point because Magny keeps falling over, keeps leaning backwards against the cage, can hardly stand up under his own power. So I think that there's been a lot of ample evidence that if you're a striker like Carlos Prates, you got Muay Thai tatted across your chest, you think that he would come out here and try and chop him down at the legs, right? Try and really take the wheels away from Magny, because then Magny can't move. And if he can't move, going to be pretty difficult for him to avoid those huge shots of Carlos Prates. Carlos Prates, from the very first time he came on Contender Series, guys, I take notes about a lot of guys that come through Contender Series. And I had sent my notes to my guy in the chat here, Jake Fagan, right? Jake had said, in the chat, a interesting, thing to me earlier where he had asked about Carlos Prates. And I had sent him back my original notes, which was, this guy seems like a slickster with good takedown defense and big power. And I think that we've seen a lot of that play out so far in his UFC career, right? This guy has come in and he's done an excellent job, putting together the strikes. And a guy like Carlos Prates, I think his biggest problems could be if he gets into a really difficult extended fight and maybe Neil Magny could just take all the shots, right? He gets beat up. He drags him out into a long extended fight and he tests the cigarette cardio. That's the only way for me that I could see Carlos Prates really struggling in this fight, because I think he can D-up takedowns if Magny goes to that route. I don't think Magny's physical enough to get him to the ground. So I think Magny would have to rely on trying to press him into the fence. I do think that you see a guy in Carlos Prates who's very dangerous in all positions. I think he could knee to the body. I think he could elbow in close. I think he could pick his shots with the punches as well. Magny could be a little bit tricky with long, awkward fighters. He grabs a hold of them. He tries to lean on them and be awkward in the clinch with them. That's kind of his upside. But when I look at how this fight plays out at distance, I just think that there's a huge levels gap between these two guys. I do think that Carlos Prates is a much heavier handed fighter. I think the guy who's much more likely to land a standing knockout at distance in this fight is Carlos Prates. I think that for Neil Magny, most of his upside in this fight would be rounds 3, 4, and 5. Try and get this guy extended, try and see if he could test his cardio, try and see if this guy doesn't have what it takes to be in 5-round fights, because everything I've seen from Carlos Prates seems like he's a guy who's willing to take a shot. He's willing to give harder shots than Neil Magny can give. He's willing to push himself, in terms of, you look at this guy, there's been footage of him on his back well back in his career, right? Way on the regionals. And the guy looks to be very competent in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He looks like a guy who likes going for knockouts, but it's not from a lack of competence and skills on the mat. Again, coming from Fighting Nerds, that seems like something where if he had a deficiency there, they'd be constantly working to address that. And in addition, what I have seen from the guy is pretty good submission instincts. I thought that he was alive for a submission on the Contender Series back in the day. Sharp markets had him priced down at like plus 450, and then some domestics opened him about plus 1200. I had a small bet on him to win by submission that night. So I've always thought to myself, this guy probably underrated in the submission game. He's throwing up triangles off his back. He's being very aggressive there. And if you look, I frankly was really disappointed by Ian Gary's lack of a finish against Neil Magny, because I thought if he decided to grapple, he would have submitted him at any point, right? And if you look at the end of that fight, you guys can go back and watch for yourself, judge for yourself. He takes him down and gets on top and starts to set up a Darce choke and looks like he's about to finish it as the clock runs out. Like he's like starting to set up the grip on a Darce choke. And I was like, why didn't you do that in the first round? It would have made your life so much easier. And frankly, it would have led to a lot more love and respect, in my opinion, for Ian Gary than what he gets. Instead, he goes out there and tries to submit MVP, who has no reputation as a grappler, right? People don't give him any credit there, but he's not been easy to submit throughout his career. You guys can go back and look at the historical data on that. So I want to say shout out to everybody who's rocking with us in the chat. Appreciate everybody who has said smash the like button. I'm going to go back and circle through some of the questions that we've already gotten from people who are rocking with us in the chat, but I just want to close out with my thoughts here on the main event. If you press me right now early in the week before I do my final tape study for a lean, for a prediction, I would say I'm going to go chalk on this one, guys. I do think Carlos Prates is being set up for the 100th UFC to come out here and have a huge, spectacular finish, but we've seen guys blow it before. I don't think that, minus 800 is a lock. I think when you have primary strikers, that's always something where I'm a little bit more weary than somebody who is going to go press a wrestling and grappling advantage for 5 rounds, and they've got the cardio to do it. So for me, there's a couple of question marks on Prates, but in terms of marketability, aura, and as well, violence on the feet, who's got more power, who's got more ability to potentially take the judges out of the equation, I think those factors, I would lean towards the Prates side. So I understand why he's favored here in the main event. Shout out to everybody who's rocking with us once again. And let's see what my guy Jake had to say here. He asked the question, was Bruna Brazil's loss to Loma Lookboonmee this year? I think that was a few years ago now. I believe that was her first fight in the UFC. I'd have to go back and look, but I have my navigation document put together, and I was throwing in some write-ups earlier. So yeah, Loma Lookboonmee looks to be her first fight in the UFC. And by the way, I was putting this document together before we got on the air. And so I remember, because I just added it to this document, that I picked Loma Lookboonmee in that fight. So I actually thought Loma was going to win there. I thought Loma was going to be able to out wrestle her. She had been improving in her wrestling over time. And for me, I just thought that we saw Denise Gomes coming in a little bit green. Now Denise Gomes is starting to put together some experience. So I think that, she's definitely shown me a lot of growth over the course of her UFC career. And last time out, I actually picked her to beat Eduarda Mora, and Mora did lose to Denise Gomes. So Denise Gomes for me is just a quality opponent, and she's beaten a lot of quality girls as well. Her loss to Angela Hill, I think, has aged just fine. So for me, she's a girl that's making some improvements, and she's been taking grappling matches as well. I think she's on the come up long term. Liam, you and I both know this is a punishment from the UFC towards Magny for killing their prize male Canadian prospect in Malat. Now he's got to pay with interest and his consciousness. Hey, maybe, brother. I think this fight is going to be determined in the first opening minutes. If Neil immediately circling and backing up, he's going to be in for a long night. If he comes forward, he's going to go to sleep. Yeah, I tend to agree. I think he's in for a tough fight, but again, he's a crafty old veteran. So, count him out at your own peril, but I've made about 20 units fading Neil Magny over the years. So Lord willing, we can keep the ball going. Shout out to our guy, Mark Schillenberger in the chat. Our guy, Yes Freak, says Scottsdale, Arizona is watching. Appreciate you big time. Real Fight Pick says, what? Interesting. Cheers. Asher says, hi, Liam. Cheers. Smash the like. Absolutely. Trap Lord, as Brian Battle said, America in this hoe. Absolutely. Zach Johnson, Liam, what's up? What's up, my man? Thank you to everybody for rocking with us. JD also says, what's up? What's up, my guy? Thank you for being here. Hell yeah. Good stuff, guys. Thank you to everybody in the chat. And last but not least, Liam, call me crazy. Is there a world where this ends up being a greasy robbery split decision for Prates? As a bit of a contrarian angle. I mean, anything's possible, but the way that this market is lining up, I think that the sports book, if they could get in a split decision, would probably rather the Magny side, right? I think everybody is going to bet on Prates here. I think they're shading the market as a result of that. But ultimately, when I look at this fight, like, could I see it going to decision? I guess. I think 5 rounds is a really long time to be out there with a guy like Prates, honestly. Like for anybody, and I think that if Prates is going to lose in the UFC, more often than not, it's going to come from taking risks. It's going to come from being super aggressive, going for the kill, and maybe coming up short. Whereas I don't really think he's the kind of guy who's going to just sit around and point fight on the outside. He is a little bit low volume at times, but that's him like trying to set up his opportunities and pick his spots. And I think when he goes 100%. So the thing I really like about him is his finishing instincts. When he sees that somebody's hurt, he closes the show, man. Smash the like, says Mushroom. I appreciate that. Let's do that. Dixon, I see the vision for a decision. Cheers to that. I see the vision for a submission, which a lot of people called me crazy for bringing up. But I just think, frankly, the path of least resistance for almost anybody against Neil Magny is if you can hurt him and then get on top of him, because the guy's just a little bit noodly in the grappling. Hit a plus 1750 parlay on last weekend on Fury. You should do regional shows too. Hey, cheers to you, brother. I think that everybody's got their own edge. And for me, I would probably be a little bit overwhelmed by just taping more of these fights, man. I try to put a lot of time, effort, and investment of mental energy into these UFC fights. But I do think it's something worth considering. And certainly, like the Contender Series is a strong suit for me. I think that could be a potential edge. So appreciate you for saying so. Liam, would you ever bet a money line this wide? On the favorite? No, honestly, not me. That's not the way I bet on MMA. I just think it's too volatile a sport. I think that even if you have the better guy, we've seen so many things go wrong from, robbery judges. I mean, I'll briefly do a quick interlude before we move to the next fight where, I'll just say I lost my bet last week. I had one bet last week. I had on the money line Garrett Armfield. And if you guys watched the fights last week, why don't you fire off what you scored that fight, if you don't mind, in the chat? Because I'm curious. But to tell you the truth, guys, like I looked at that fight and I was pretty darn sure that we got at least 2 rounds. I thought that there was a case for 3-0 Garrett Armfield. That could be me being biased, right? I'll level with you guys. I always tell you that I could be wrong in my opinion, but it is my truthful opinion. I said at the time, I thought he won the first 2 rounds. I thought that he won the 3rd round. I thought his corner had acknowledged as much. And unfortunately, 2 out of 3 judges see it the other way, right? According to our guy, Tristan, he says Armfield closed minus 350 live on the market. I saw similar prices at the time. And again, the live market isn't always everything. We've seen tons of times the live market is wrong. So again, the thing that is grating is that it felt like 9 out of 10 people that you asked on Twitter, 9 out of 10 people that you asked that were in the arena, 9 out of 10 people that were in the media, like any way you want to slice it, really went that way. And so we have Valen saying that he thought Saidi won rounds 1 and 2. I mean, I didn't agree, but I appreciate your honesty. Benino in the chat says 29-28 Armfield, but I had money on him. Fair enough. I think the commentary team, another example of people that are supposed to be experts, former fighters. Many of them came out and said, what are we doing? What is going on with this decision? And the thing that's a little bit grating about this sport at times is you could feel like you did everything right. You could feel like everybody agrees with you that this person won the fight, and it doesn't matter at the end of the day from dollars and cents. So you have to always think about what could go wrong. And at minus 800, guys, anything could go wrong. At plus 122, which was the price I got on Armfield, sometimes the split decision goes your way. Sometimes it goes against you. You hope that in the long run, it works out in your favor. I've had a lot of luck in my gambling life and career, so I will knock on wood and say, hey, hopefully that luck continues to come my way. Hopefully these unlucky beats, the bad beats, have been in the past now. But if you look 2 weeks in a row, 100% of media members scored the fight for Carlos Leal, either 30-27 or 29-28. They give the unanimous decision to Rinat Fakhretdinov. That's frustrating, right? That's a jarring outcome when you think that your guy clearly won, when you got a great price and the outcome doesn't come through. But to have it happen 2 weeks in a row where 9 out of 10 media members agree with you, and it's just, it's very frustrating, right? Because again, I felt like I kept a very disciplined slate. And guys, I also bet Garrett Armfield submission at 17-1. And you've never seen him wrestle like that. You've never seen him attempt as many submissions. And so, Valen, you could say that the Armfield fight wasn't as bad as Leal, but it was the wrong decision. And it was the wrong decision twice in a row. So it's just compound interest, right? It's like, okay, screw me one time a little bit, but then screw me huge the week before. I'm going to just feel like I'm starting to get fucked a lot, So that was for me, my frustration. But I also want to say you're emotional in the immediate aftermath, right? When you go through the result, you say to yourself, there's no way to win here. Like I get the good bets and I still lose. But ultimately, I can go back and point you to many times where I've bet something that was stupid, that shouldn't have come through, and it came through for me. And I have to just be grateful for those times and remind myself that it's a run, right? It's a long-term game, and you don't want to get too caught up in your results, positive or negative. You want to ride the waves and just try and improve each and every time out. Make fewer bad bets, more good bets. I think overall, those are good bets that I could look in the eye and say, I'd probably make that again if given the opportunity. So that's what I have to just keep pushing forward, make good bets, and hope that it all works out my way. Always say it's better to be lucky than good. And Lord willing, we get a little luck on our side. Lady Luck, ride with us this week, and let's see if we can get the ball rolling. With that being said, though, guys, we're going to assume that the Miles Johns fight is canceled for now. Obviously, we'll come back later in the week. We will talk about the fight when it gets announced, when we have an opponent. But what am I going to tell you guys about a fight that we just got canceled as we're getting on the air? You know what I'm saying? I don't think that there's much to delve into there. But what we can do is we can talk about one of my favorite fighters in the UFC. Here's where my biases are going to be showing, guys. Gerald Meerschaert. Gerald Money Meerschaert, GM3. One of the coolest guys in the UFC, claiming wins for American Jiu-Jitsu for the longest time. And you think about this guy, what Gerald brings to the table, he's extremely experienced, he's very savvy, and he's typically underrated, right? If you just look at this guy, people expect nothing from him, and they always talk about how he's not so good. But when you look at this guy, what I think his most underrated attribute is that he's got a heavy body kick, right? And he's not afraid to throw it. So I think that defensively, his striking leaves a lot to be desired, guys. He's a little bit slow, right? I say this as a huge fan of Gerald, somebody that loves his style. He's a little bit slow. He's a little bit stiff. He's a little bit plodding in the early going. Those are some things he can't really fix, right? He's a little bit on the older side. And also he's been fighting for 1,000,000 years. So he is a little bit rigid. But what he can do is he can deliver those big, heavy kicks that are thudding like pieces of wood, right? And then you can also see that he's got decent enough boxing combinations. He's willing to commit to his shots. He's a Duke Rufus product. He's been in the gym forever. So he knows where his bread is buttered on the feet. Don't try and be Johnny Sophisticato. Don't try and do 16-piece combinations. Basics, sticking to it, using his southpaw attack. And then when you look at, what he does on the mat, he's typically very patient. He's very, aggressive when he gets a good position, and he can make people pay as soon as he gets on top. He tends to put people in really bad positions. Shout out to Tristan, says if RDR gasses from cutting weight for the first time, GM3 round 3 is super live. GM3 is a prolific round 3 submission artist, but how about this? GM3 slows people down pretty quick. All right, let's go back and look at Gerald Meerschaert, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at him on Tapology. So we're going to switch over to the tab. 37-17 in professional mixed martial arts, 12-9 in the UFC, guys. The all-time submission leader in the middleweight division with 11 submissions, guys. He's 11-1 career to the submission. Do not sleep on this man. Do not forget about Gerald Meerschaert and how skilled and talented that he is. If you look back, win over Edmund Shabazian, fantastic. We're going to go ahead and close out his grappling results. Win over Edmund Shabazian, fantastic. Goes against Brian Barberena, and against Brian, Brian just was not at the middleweight level, right? Like he just shouldn't have been there. But Edmund, that was a good win because Edmund's a freak athlete, and he's the kind of guy that can go out there and kick Brad Tavares' head off. Then you look at the Joe Pyfer fight, and he got knocked out. He lost to him in a grappling match as well. Joe Pyfer, big, strong kid, and presented too many problems for him. Bruno Silva, if you guys go back and watch that, I know Bruno Silva says he was sick and he hasn't really had a good fight in a couple years now, but guys, go back and watch that. It is a guillotine in name only. This guy knocked him out. Gerald Meerschaert knocked out Bruno Silva, the great Bruno Silva, who's never been knocked out, never finished with strikes. Go back and look. Alex Pereira could not put him down with strikes. And GM3 said, sit down, young man, and he hit him with the force of God. So Gerald Meerschaert deserves all the credit. Been claiming wins for American Jiu-Jitsu since I don't know when. Then you look at Krzysztof Jatko, and that was not a great loss for GM3. He's a little bit hit and miss as a fighter, right? But then the win over Dustin Stoltzfus, aging all right. Dustin Stoltzfus out there getting a huge knockout over MAB over the weekend. Shout out to my guy, Mark Schillenberg. I'm so sorry about that, brother. MAB screwed the pooch on you. No doubt about it. This guy loses in Canada every time for whatever reason. He cannot get it right for these folks up in Canada. I feel bad for our guy, MAB. I don't know if that shin is there anymore, brother. And Dixon is saying, I'm hearing a lot of folks run with the narrative that RDR is a gasser. Concerns me when the entire MMA betting community agrees on any narrative. It's like chalk and DFS bound to fail. I definitely hear where you're coming from there. I try not to listen to other people's analysis too much. Especially early on in the week, I try and do my own thing. The only show I've listened to so far this week is Santino DeFranco and Brandon Olivas. I could tell you Olivas, was all the way out on GM3. Meanwhile, Santino DeFranco kind of feels the same way I feel, which is that Gerald Meerschaert is like a proven, UFC black belt, very quality. And I think that De Ridder, here's the thing. I'll just level with you guys, and I don't know as much about De Ridder. I'm going to have to familiarize myself more with his game. I watched a in-depth video, just how good is Rene De Ridder on YouTube. Want to shout out to that guy. Who is that? I think Kenyon Kimura. Let me go ahead and pull this up. Because I watched this before I got on the air today. So how good is Reinier De Ridder actually by Keon Kimura? I'm going to share this on the screen so you guys can see it. So if you see this right here, this guy, Keon Kimura, makes some good videos. And this one right here, fantastic. If you want to get just a primer on this guy's career, he seems to me to be a pretty talented grappler. But how many guys have we seen be talented grapplers somewhere outside the UFC and then come into the UFC and maybe that grappling doesn't translate, or maybe the physicality doesn't translate, or, maybe they get big nerves because they're competing in the UFC for the first time. Now, when you talk about RDR coming into a UFC Apex show against Gerald Meerschaert, maybe some of those nerves aren't there, but I'll tell you what, like if I was a primary grappler, if that was my real skill set and I was coming into a UFC fight, I would not be thrilled to sign the line against a guy like Gerald Meerschaert, just to tell you the truth, because Gerald Meerschaert is difficult to submit, right? If you look back, Jack Hermanson, guys, got him with the guillotine choke. Let's go ahead and show this on the screen. And it's listed as a guillotine choke. I would call it the seated, let's see, seated Ketakatami. Is that right? Seated Ketakatami. Yeah, the seated Ketakatami. That's the one, guys. So if you look, we'll go ahead and share this tab. The seated Ketakatami. This choke was taught to Jack Hermanson at a John Danaher seminar. Okay, this is Nikki Ryan in this thumbnail right here from B Team. But this choke, if you could see, it's basically a guillotine, right? You imagine the guillotine is somebody's head and their neck, right? Imagine you get the arm as well. You just go one stage deeper. So you have the arm engaged as well. And that choke is fantastic. It's extremely tight. And it takes people by surprise. So GM3, his one submission loss was against Jack Hermanson, who's just a pretty, fantastic grappler in his own right, a primary grappler for mixed martial arts, a guy who's very physically strong, has a Greco-Roman background. That guy was able to catch him in this choke, sit to it, and finish it before GM3 was able to react. That is the only time he's been submitted in the UFC, and he's fought a laundry list of tough opponents over the years, right? Khamzat Chimaev knocked him out in the first round. So obviously that one doesn't, quite flow the same way. But if you look at what this guy brings to the table, I think that Gerald Meerschaert is just very difficult to outgrapple, period, point blank. Dustin Stoltzfus had some success, but ultimately he couldn't sustain his own success because he got tired faster than GM3. And that's what GM3 does a lot of. If it was people running with that narrative, Dixon, and it was for some guy who doesn't push a pace, for a guy who doesn't have good cardio and these kind of things, I would definitely get where you're coming from. But I do think GM3 has been this sneaky talent his whole career where, hey, I believe it was like minus 200 against Dustin Stoltzfus. And did he look minus 200 at any point? No. But was it inevitable that Dustin Stoltzfus was going to fall apart before Gerald Meerschaert? It kind of seemed like it was. And we've seen GM3 do that to a few people, right? We think about, again, a guy who was able to finish Trevin Giles, going out there and submitting him with that guillotine choke in round 3. It was GM3. So had to sneeze, but we're back. And I think that GM3 just doesn't get all the love and respect he deserves. One fight I want to highlight from his resume, guys, Makhmud Muradov was 25-6. Okay. He was doing well in the UFC. He was having some success. If you go back and look, he had beaten Alessio Di Chirico via decision, knocked out Trevor Smith in the 3rd round, knocked out Andrew Sanchez in the 3rd round. So you're thinking to yourself, man, this guy might actually have good cardio, right? This guy might actually be able to push the right kind of pace. And unfortunately, what ended up happening is Makhmud Muradov got submitted by the 2nd round in that fight. And if you go back and watch it, again, I feel like people don't rewatch these GM3 fights. If you rewatch it, he was hurting him to the body. GM3 was roasting this man on the feet by round 2. He got him tired by hitting him with that thudding body kick over and over again. So Makhmud Muradov, a guy who's known for the striking, a guy who's known for, going out there and moving around and doing all this, Gerald Meerschaert was able to just wear him down, chop him down, and it didn't take 3 full rounds, right? It was just that 2nd round, where he was able to get that going, and he quickly tired him out. I can just tell you guys, I was at the casino in person, and I was the only one with a Gerald Meerschaert ticket. Everybody was crying in their coffee, saying, how did minus 500 Makhmud Muradov lose? And me and my buddy Pete were jumping up and down because we had GM3 ITD. So I think when you look back, GM3 definitely biased as shit. I bet this guy against Khamzat Chimaev, one of the worst bets I've ever placed in my life. But that's how much faith and confidence I always have in my guy GM3 to test somebody's cardio down the stretch. When you get killed by the first right cross in 35 seconds, that's not going to do it for us, right? But when you see GM3 in these longer extended fights, I think he does a great job. And here's the other thing. Narrative Nation. Let's go Narrative Nation for my guy Dixon. GM3 has the potential to completely embarrass RDR. Imagine you're Dana White and you say, I could get this guy who's a champion in other organizations to come in and get beat by my gatekeeper, my ultimate gatekeeper, Gerald Meerschaert. I'm just saying, Narrative Nation, if he wins, we promote him. We move him up the card. We get to book him. Now he's our guy. Then we give him the UFC stamp of approval. But if he loses, we say he was never that good anyways, because that's a fraudulent promotion and the only real fights are in the UFC. So that for me is why I'm also like, yeah, GM3 is the UFC's hitman right now. Nobody respects GM3 more than I do. So I feel like coming into this fight, I got love and respect for my guy GM3. It's going to be a battle, always is with a guy like GM3. He's going to have some difficult moments, but I feel like if this guy, comes out here and he tries to go for a finish, tries to go grapple with GM3, like go find out, because I think he could definitely take him out, right? Like, he's a young man, young enough, I think 34, whatever. He's a guy who's got some experience. Maybe he could do it, but you got to prove it to me, because I know GM3 can swim in waters with sharks, brother. So that's how I feel about it. Let's go ahead and take a look at the rest of this card, guys. We've got Bernardo Sopaj taking on Ricky Turcios. And I got to say, this is a fun fight. This is an interesting fight. For Bernardo Sopaj, my concern, how does he come back, right? He came back, he's coming back off of a pretty brutal knockout, right? Vinicius Lockdog Oliveira put him on a highlight reel. No two ways about that. It was a brutal one. If you guys haven't seen that one, see that one. Crazy, crazy knockout. But I also don't want to forget that Bernardo Sopaj was having a lot of success in that fight, right? I thought that the guy was really doing a good job of getting to some good positions, landing some powerful shots, making Oliveira dogfight him. But Oliveira's a dog. Oliveira was willing to go there. And he was tough, man. He stayed tough in a difficult fight. He took out his leg, and you kind of saw Sopaj, check out a little bit mentally. And unfortunately, that lapse in focus and concentration led to him getting knocked unconscious brutally. So how does he come back from a confidence standpoint? I do have my questions, but in terms of skill, I think that this guy's got all the ability to go knock out Ricky Turcios on the feet. You know, I think when you look at Ricky, he's a lot of smoke and mirrors on the feet. You know, he's a lot of feinting. He's a lot of moving. He's a lot of, you know, flim-flamming about with shots that are, you know, a little bit loosey-goosey, right? He's like throwing wild shots. He's kind of scrambling around and moving. I do think that he's a good scrambler. You look at Mark, what he's saying, he's sneaky good on the mat. You know, you look at a guy like Brady Heastand, a guy who can push that kind of pace, push that kind of scrambling. He struggled with Ricky in that extended fight. You know, he did get a little bit out of sorts in the pacing there. I think Ricky's cardio is a weapon, right? I think that's one of his best attributes. I think he's a pretty tough guy. I don't think that, you know, mere pain is going to make him check out. I think you're going to need to hurt him, you know, really get to him. But I will just say this, guys, like when I look at Ricky, you know, I remember he was a huge favorite going into the Zahabi fight. And that was the first time that I bet on Zahabi as a dog. Shout out to our guy, Ayman Zahabi, now ranked in the UFC. How long have we been telling you about Ayman Zahabi on this show? Trying to tell you he was a good fighter when nobody believed me. Now he's got that ranking by his name. Can't take it away from him. But when you look back, Ayman Zahabi, right, was plus 200 against Ricky Turcios because everybody loves the volume and they love how much he throws and they love all this stuff. And did he have any wrestling success against Ayman? No. Did he have any grappling success? No. Did he have striking success? No. Like he stood at distance. And the way I describe that fight to people is Ayman drew a line in the sand, right? And said, if you cross this, I'm going to hit you really hard. And then Ricky was like, no problem, brother. And he just didn't cross it all night. He just fought from behind the black lines. You know, he's doing little dance moves, you know, little 3-piece combinations, you know, from 15 feet away. And it was all fun and games and whatever. And then the weird decision just went to Zahabi because he was trying to engage. He was trying to throw and connect shots and, you know, establish his range. And it was just a very weird fight. And I do think Ricky is a guy that's less dangerous than Sopaj. Like, I just think if you look at Sopaj, he was in a fight last time with a guy who's a killer. And I think if you put Vinicius Lockdog Oliveira in there with Ricky Turcios, he would probably do really, really bad things to him. You know, I think he would hurt him really badly. And I think that that's kind of the difference here, right? Is the level of intensity. You know, I think Sopaj is a little bit more intense. I think he's going to come out here with a point to prove. I think he's a good fighter. I actually picked him to beat Lockdog Oliveira last time. And he came into that fight on short notice, guys. He took on a tough guy on short notice. He had a ton of success, and then he fell short. And one thing my old wrestling coach used to say to me is you never want to say it was a good loss, right? There's nothing good about losing. But when you look at how he performed, he showed that he's a guy that can compete with guys like this. And I think when you look at Ricky, you know, against the best guys, he gets flatlined. He gets put in bad situations, you know. We've seen that in the past before he got to the UFC. And I think that that could rear its ugly head here. I do think that this is, you know, from a cardio standpoint, you say, hey, Ricky's got a chance here to make this interesting. But from a danger standpoint and intensity standpoint, I definitely prefer the Sopaj side. I think Ricky is a little bit more of a fun character. You know, I'm not saying he's not a fighter, right? He goes out there, he swings, he does everything. But in terms of just like, he's a little bit more loosey-goosey and smiling and happy to be there. And I think that Sopaj is going to come out here with a lot more intentionality. I think he's got a chance to take his back, you know, after hurting him and maybe putting him away that way. But I just think overall, I lean towards Sopaj as the more violent guy who's going to do a little more damage over the course of this fight. But at the prices, definitely a little prohibitive because I don't know where he's at coming off that knockout loss. Shout out to Dixon says, I think it's safe to assume Sopaj is going to be swinging hard, looking for a KO at all times. So if Ricky times his entries right, he could be able to get him down multiple times. That's possible. I don't really rate Ricky as a wrestler either. You know, I think Ricky's better as a counter wrestler than he is as a proactive wrestler, right? I think if he tried to grab a hold of most people's hips, they could sprawl out on him, push away at the hips and get away. But I think that if other guys try and wrestle into him, he's long, he's awkward, he's used to being in those positions. He can sit to a switch, things like that. I kind of think that's where he has a little bit more of an advantage. All right, guys, let's take a look here. One of the reads that I was really proud of at one point was Polyana Viana against Gillian Robertson. I had Gillian Robertson, KO at a big number, and then I had KO2 as well at a big number. When you look at Gillian, she's been getting a lot more assertive on the ground with her ground and pound. She's been, beating the shit out of women, for lack of a better term, right? Taking them down, putting them through the spin cycle, taking that cross wrist, putting them in bad situations, elbows, punches. Din Thomas, basically made her a project. And you look at Luana Pinheiro, she's clearly got some skill, some talent, right? Some judo ability. She's got some physicality. She's got some things to like, some marketability, but there's definitely been some cause for concern as well. She's getting hurt. She's getting rocked. She's getting tired. And she just seems more like a girl who's willing to quit out there, And again, that's not me trying to make light of anything. She's in these difficult fights. Amanda Hebos, they were like former roommates and stuff. Like they went out there and went to war, man. They bit down on the mouthpiece. They hit each other with bombs, but ultimately she got dropped badly by Amanda Hebos. I don't know that that was a great look. And I think that when you look at some of the other things that we've seen from her, the fight with Randa Marcos comes to mind. She's out there, looking distressed, right? When she gets into these fighting scenarios and they're not going her way. So for me, I think Gillian Robertson, she's a very hit and miss fighter, right? Her consistency hasn't always been there. You look at the win-loss record, it's not great over the course of her professional career, right? Definitely a lot of losses for a girl as talented as Gillian Robertson has shown to be. But we also know she's got a ton of wins. She's got a lot of submission wins in the division as well. So you look at a girl like Gillian Robertson, she's been chipping away at 115 pounds. You think that she's got some size, some physicality she can potentially leverage over these women. She's 11-6 now in the UFC with 7 wins by submission, 2 wins via KO or TKO, and she's just 2-4 to the decision. So when she's out there relying on the judges, things don't work well for her. But when she goes out there and pursues the finish, we've seen Gillian Robertson do an excellent job. And last time out, she did get that unanimous decision victory over Michelle Waterson-Gomez. I'll tell you the truth, guys. I thought that fight could have been stopped multiple times. I think if it wasn't Michelle's retirement fight, they might have stopped it. She was getting beat up. She was getting embarrassed. She had nothing to offer offensively at one point during the fight, And so for me, Gillian Robertson has just been continuing to chip away, continuing to show a better product. And the Tabitha Ricci loss, I think that's a fair enough loss. I think Tabitha Ricci, quality jiu-jitsu, quality wrestling, good physicality, difficult outing for Gillian Robertson, right? Going to be difficult to get her engaged in the grappling, going to be difficult to get her tired as well. And so I think that this is a better fight, a better matchup for her. Luana Pinheiro might be able to D up some takedowns early, but unless she's able to really damage Gillian Robertson or dissuade her from, continuing to attempt to grapple, I think that Gillian, even if she ends up on bottom, she's going to feel comfortable. She's going to be able to work back to some good positions. And I think ultimately, kind of like a Jasmine Jasuda Vicious, I think she can wear her down over time and start to take advantage of that top position. So for me, the pick here is Gillian Robertson. She's ranked number 14 coming into this one against the number 13 in the world. So both these women are top 15 talents. I just think right now, Gillian Robertson, way more experience in the UFC. She's been putting in her time. She's been putting in that sweat equity, and she's a massive favorite as a result. I think that when you look at the pricing, it's a little bit prohibitive here. So I'd have to look at the prop market or the underdog in this kind of fight. But ultimately, I think the right woman is favored. I think Gillian deserves that distinction based on her UFC experience. Next up, guys, we got a UFC debutant in Mansur Abdul-Malik. I could just tell you guys that I have a tape study that I did on Mansur Abdul-Malik. I'll show you guys quickly what I have here. So this is before he came to the Contender Series, and I listed out his background here. He wrestled at Wyoming Seminary, which is a top prep school in Pennsylvania. He also is previously training out of MMA Masters in Miami, Florida, now working with Extreme Couture under Eric Nixick. If you guys know, Eric Nixick coached previous. Valen says Gillian quit against Barber. Fair enough. I do think that's fair. But if you look back, Barber is huge, right? At 125. This is a fight at 115. And I was mentioning, I think Gillian can leverage her physicality. I think Macy Barber makes a lot of women at 125 quit, if I'm being truthful. But that is a fair point by you for sure. Then we look at the fact that this guy, though, is training with top-level pros at 185 and 205. I think that's a huge advantage for him in terms of Mansur Abdul-Malik's development. Then you look at the fact he was recruited to wrestle D1 at the University of Maryland. It didn't really go so well for him, but he was an elite high school wrestler. And I think that his goals were always set on MMA, as far as it looks. You look at this guy, his interviews are very positive. I liked what I saw from him, and he's extremely athletic, aggressive, comes forward, willing to hit people, willing to hurt people. Can he be hurt? Can he be clipped? Yeah, because he takes a lot of risks. He's a guy that is willing to go out there and, throw heavies. But ultimately, I think that Mansur is just a good athlete. And I think that now that he's around the right people, he's going to put himself in a great situation to advance his career. His wrestling background as well, I think will be huge for him in terms of, moving up in the ranks. When you look on the other side, let's go ahead and look at the tapology for Dusko Todorovic. And I just know it's not super promising, right? Unfortunately. So we go ahead and take a look over at Dusko's record, and he's 3-4 in the UFC, 3 losses via KO or TKO. So not a great start. And you look at the loss to Christian Leroy Duncan, knee injury in the first round, didn't really get a clean resolution there. Then you look at the Jordan Wright fight. I mean, Jordan Wright, just not a UFC level fighter in my view. You look at the Chidi Njokuani performance, instantly gets folded up with the elbow there. Maki Pitolo, another guy who, despite being, a fine enough fighter, he just wasn't UFC level. He's no longer with the promotion either. He lost to Gregory RoboCop Rodriguez, which is a fair loss. You understand that loss. You give him a pass there. But then you look at the fact he lost to Punahele Soriano, a guy who at the time really went on to struggle in the UFC for quite some time before refinding his footing. So if you look, I don't really know what I'm seeing with Dusko. I'm not really seeing a lot to like from Dusko. Beating Daquan Townsend, that's not a UFC level win. Daquan Townsend was quickly let go from the promotion. Teddy Ash, a guy who was never seen nor heard from again, his best win on his record by far is against Michel de Molador Pereira all the way back in 2018. But since 2019, this guy has had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fights since 2019. Not a ton of activity, and he's been injured. He's been dealing with that. He's been out. You look at the canceled bout against Edmund Shabazian. He withdrew from that booking, so they're not giving him any favors, right? They're giving him a tough guy in Mansur Abdul-Malik that I don't think a lot of guys are going to be anxious to go answer the call for, because he could probably go out there and knock out a decent number of guys on the feet, and the guys that he can't knock out, he could probably put some of them on their ass, right? Take them down and put them in some bad situations. So I don't think his jiu-jitsu's all there. I think he's got to continue to work on rounding out his well-rounded skill set. But at 6-0, I think that Mansur Abdul-Malik, is probably a deserved favorite there. Despite the fact Dusko's been around for a while, I just don't know how serious he is about fighting anymore. I don't know if his body's going to hold up to fighting at this level anymore. A lot of TKO losses early in his UFC career. And I just think he's having a hard time making it to the cage right now. I think Mansur Abdul-Malik is a guy who really wants his opportunities right now. And I wouldn't want to be locked across the cage from him. I'll tell you that. Next up, we got Charles Radtke taking on Matthew Semelsberger. And this is a weird fight because both guys have underperformed and overperformed at times, but ultimately I think Matthew Semelsberger either lands big power punches or he just really struggles in his fights. If you look at the guy's fights overall in the UFC, I don't think his grappling is there at a UFC level. I just think unless he is able to hurt the guy first, his grappling just looks suspect. I think that when you look at Radtke, he should have a grappling and wrestling advantage on paper in this matchup. Radtke is also a guy who's, not the biggest welterweight. So if you're looking at Radtke in this fight, he's going to be 34 years of age compared to a 31-year-old in Semelsberger. He's going to be 5'9" compared to 6'1", and he's going to be 72 inches in reach compared to 75 inches in reach. So what does that tell us? It tells us he's going to be way smaller. So Semelsberger could have an advantage in this fight just because if he's able to D up the takedowns, keep it on the feet, he's a big guy. He might be able to hit him hard from outside of distance. But ultimately, Radtke ran into Carlos Prates, and that was a really tough performance, right? He got cleaned up there. But if you look, beating Gilbert Urbina, he knocked him out easily. Beating Blood Diamond Mike Mathetha, he wrestled him into the cage without much issue. Raheem Forrest, not a bad fighter. He was able to go out there, hurt him, and finish him in the first round. And I don't think he's a bad fighter at all. So Radtke can get hurt. He has been finished before. But if you look at him, he's got a pretty decent submission game. And I think that he could try and leverage that in this fight against Semelsberger, who I don't know that he could go out there and submit him, right? If you look at Matt Semelsberger, he's only been submitted once, and it's been a while since that's happened to him. But he has been grounded. He has been taken down before. Guys have rode out the top position when they needed to at times. And he did get Darce choked by 3-4 Darren Costa on the regional scene back in 2017. So let's see if maybe Charles Radtke can test that 5-5 record, push him into the negative category. But something's got to give there, right? He's a 500 fighter. Meanwhile, Radtke a little bit less experience, but a guy who at least is posting a winning record right now, 2-1 in the UFC. This smells like another low volume, greasy split decision. I don't blame you for thinking that. I think both these guys could be a little bit tepid coming off their recent performances. Semelsberger got out-wrestled, out-grappled, beat up a little bit by Preston Parsons, but he did some damage in that fight. He got knocked down, hurt badly by Uros Medic the fight before. He's on a 3-fight skid. So, you have to think Matthew Semelsberger is fighting for his job here in this one. So perhaps we get an inspired performance out of him. All right, guys, let's take a look at what's next on the card. We've got Cody Stamann taking on Damon Blackshear. And, oh boy, I don't know that we've been seeing a great product out of Cody Stamann lately. Excuse me. Let me go back and look. Yeah, lost to Taylor Lapalus, and that was kind of a lifeless performance from what I remember. Losing a unanimous decision, lost a unanimous decision to DSDA. That was a much closer fight. That one could have went either way, but DSDA probably just landed a little bit more of the hard, impactful shots. Luana Lacerda looked like shit in that fight. No disrespect to the man. I don't know if he even is still employed by the UFC. I would have been surprised if they kept him. That was a horrible performance by him. The Eddie Wineland fight, Eddie is unfortunately long since passed it. He got finished easily by Saeed. He lost to Marab, and he actually competed pretty well there. So he's a guy that's been a little hit and miss. Damon Blackshear, I think, is a really talented guy. He's coming off a knockout loss, so that's a little bit shitty. But if you look at his strength of competition in the UFC, guys, listen to these losses. Montel Jackson, Mario Bautista, Farid Basharat. I mean, those are all guys that, in my opinion, are future top 15, right? Like, I really think that those are top guys. He also beat Luan Lacerda, but he finished him. He beat Jose Johnson, twisted him in the first round. That was a crazy, awesome win. And then Jose Johnson went out there and finished Chad and Hellinger, something Cody Gibson couldn't do. So you look back, I think that overall, Damon Blackshear is a really damn good fighter. And getting killed by Montel Jackson, listen, he had a fresh chin. He came in there and he got hurt before the fight even got going. Honestly, I don't know how much I take away from that. Montel Jackson hits like a truck, and he came out there and hit him before the fight got started. Damn, like that was a cool knockout. But ultimately, I think Damon Blackshear losing to Mario Bautista in a nip-tuck decision, there's nothing to sneeze at there. Aldo did that, right? Then you look at Jose Johnson, again, fine fighter. He beat him. Luan Lacerda knocked him out, cleaned him up accordingly. Farid Basharat lost a competitive decision, made him work. And Farid is very good. He's the better Basharat brother. Lost to Yusuf Zalal in a majority draw where he got 10-8'd in round 3. He was up 2-0 on Yusuf Zalal, who's a minus XXX this weekend. So I think Damon Blackshear is the guy, man. In terms of, he's a very good fighter, and he got beat in his last fight. I think he's going to come back and respond to that favorably, but he's heavily chalked out to do so here, and he has been out wrestled in the past. So I think there's enough reason to be skeptical. Maybe you don't go behind these big prices, but ultimately, like, who do I think is trending in the right direction? Damon Blackshear, I think he hit a blip in the radar last time out. But yeah, I think Cody has a more proven resume. He's been looking really flat to me, and he's 35. So I don't know that I can expect him to get much better here. But where's the confidence at for Damon coming off that knockout? I think that's a fair ask. This might just be a stay away fight and learn a little bit about these guys. Maybe bet live, if anything, on this kind of fight, because I want to see where these guys are at, right? You want to see if Damon Blackshear can take more than one punch in his next fight, right? Although that Cody Stamann's not really the guy to test that necessarily. Now, guys, I will mention, I skipped over a fight between Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos and Zach Scroggin. That was not out of intention. It was just because I don't know who Zach Scroggin is. I saw earlier today, he is on a lengthy win streak, pro and amateur, I think 15 fights. However, he's fighting a pretty low level of competition on the professional scene. So he's going to get his first real test against Easy Dose. And I could tell you guys, I one time laid a huge price. I think it was like minus 200 on Easy Dose against Benoit Saint Denis, because I was like, as good as Benoit Saint Denis is coming into the UFC, he's going to get beat up really bad by Easy Dose. I was like, this is going to be brutal. And Easy Dose whooped his ass so badly. Easy Dose is not an easy guy to make a debut against. He's one of the most seasoned, savvy vets in the company. But also, it's a welterweight fight, and you got a young guy who's coming in, anxious for an opportunity. He's going to come in probably swinging at his head. Easy Dose has been clipped on the chin before, so anything can happen in MMA. But ultimately, Easy, should have beaten Renat, and he's been a killer throughout his whole career. So I think that you really like what you see from a guy like Easy Dose most of the time, and a guy like Zach Scroggin in these kind of contexts and situations. These guys that come in on short notice, they tend to struggle. So I think he's going to have a hard time here and maybe bounce back in the next one. Next up, guys, we got Melissa Mullins and Klaudia Sygula. I don't know who Klaudia Sygula is, but I could tell you Melissa Mullins let me down so bad last time out. One of my most foolish bets of the year was on Melissa Mullins ITD. I should have just bet the fight not to go the distance, but I thought she had a good chance to take Cornole to the ground and finish her. And unfortunately, she took her to the ground, got reversed, and then got finished on the feet so easily. She looked like a shell of herself, honestly. And so, you hope that she's able to get back on track, but she's 33 years of age, right? She's not a spring chicken. She's only had the 7 professional fights. And Nora Cornole is not a bad fighter, right? She's definitely UFC level, but she's not like blowing anybody's hair back, right? She's fighting really close with everybody for the most part. And then she was able to just brutalize her. The Arena Alexieva win was fine, but again, it wasn't blow your hair back stuff. Neither was Daria Zeliankova. So I don't know exactly what we're getting with Melissa Mullins. Her credentials on the ground sounded really good, but then to see what it looked like in the cage, I just wasn't impressed, honestly. How she performed that night. So maybe it was just one-off night. I know she went through some stuff outside the cage, so we wish her nothing but the best, but got to try and be objective as an analyst. And I honestly thought she looked better regionally than she did in the UFC so far. So hopefully she's able to get things on track. On the other side, Klaudia Sygula, I don't know who she is, but she's out of Ankos MMA in Poland. So that's a solid enough team. She hasn't lost since 2021, and she has been armbarred a million times, though. That's not great. So maybe she's going to get submitted here by Melissa Mullins, who does have a grappling background and pedigree. But ultimately, I'd have to do a little more tape and due diligence to feel good talking about that one, guys. I'm going to ask real quick, guys, before we move on to these last few prelims, if you don't mind, go ahead and smash the like button. Go ahead and get subscribed to the channel if you're not already. Each and every week on the show, we talk all the fights that go down in the UFC, and most of the time we talk about them on the first look as well as on Bets and Banter. This week, I can assure you we will be here for Bets and Banter later in the week, and we're already here for the first look for all you guys. So later in the week, we'll be circling back on all the rescheduled fights, all the rebooked fights, things like that. And also, Lord willing, we're going to be dropping some more content on the channel this week that I think you guys will like. So stay tuned for that. With that being said, guys, let's talk about the next fight up. We got Cortavious Romius against Gaston Bolaños. And for me, this is a pretty straightforward fight, right? I think from a money line standpoint, it's a dog or pass. I was a little bit surprised to see Gaston Bolaños as a plus 175 in this spot. Marcus McGee last time out was able to run through Gaston a little bit and, kind of just put a little pace to him. He's good in all positions. He trains with a great team. He's a well-rounded guy. Cortavious Romius is fighting to competitive decisions with Michael Imperato, a guy who is off the Canadian regional scene and ultimately looked not very good in that fight. And I think that Cortavious has some good opportunistic submissions on his resume and things like that. But the striking defense is just not good. It definitely needs a lot of work. And I think he showed a marginally better product in his second Contender Series showing. But his first Contender Series showing against Ramon Taveras, it's the opposite of defense, right? He's just like walking out with his chin way up in the air. And I think that when I'm looking at this kind of matchup, like I think Cortavious is live to get knocked out in the first round. I think it's a competitive decision if it hits the cards. And I think that ultimately, like, Cortavious, if he doesn't submit this guy, is probably not covering this price. So that's the way I see this, man. I'm not a huge Gaston Bolanos guy, but I just think he's got some cool knockouts on the resume. We've seen Cortavious Romeus be on the wrong side of some of those. And I ultimately just think that for his skills, he still makes some mistakes. He still puts himself in some bad positions and bad situations and takes some risks. So I think he's getting better, right? He's a young enough guy. If we go back and look, 30 years of age compared to 32 for Gaston. But Gaston's the bigger fighter, right? 5'7" compared to 5'4", 69-inch reach compared to 68-inch reach. So Gaston's the bigger guy. He's been in the UFC a little longer. He's been around the fight game for a long time. And, I think he's ready for this kind of opponent. So I think I'm just going to pick Gaston outright to win this fight and say if I was going to hedge it, I'd probably hedge with Romeus by sub at a decent price. But ultimately, I think it's tough sledding for him. And last but not least, guys, we got Tresean Gore taking on Antonio Tricoli. And Antonio Tricoli's been in as many fights outside the octagon as he's been inside the octagon in his recent months. Y'all know what I'm saying? But he did lose to Shara Bullet Magomedov. And I said that he was sub 1 or bust in that fight. If he wasn't going to go out there and just commit 100%, taking the guy down, taking his back, and putting him away, he was going to lose that fight every time. Against Tresean Gore, this is a weird one for me for a couple different reasons. We'll start with the fact that Tresean Gore's just been struggling to stay healthy, right? Like talent, the guy's got it, right? The guy clearly has some ability to fight, but we've also seen there's some problems, right? Like if you look at Tresean Gore, in my opinion, there's no reason Tresean Gore should ever lose to Cody Brundage. Like Cody Brundage is not the fighter Tresean Gore is, in my humble opinion. But Tresean got a little bit too comfortable exchanging there, got a little bit too complacent there, and he got clipped on the chin, got put down hard. And for me, that was very surprising. I did not see that coming. You look at Tresean, he's still just 30 years of age, but he's dealt with a couple surgeries, I believe. He's dealt with some inactivity, right? A couple canceled bouts. If we go look at his topology, scheduled to fight Bo Nickel, Gore torn wrist ligament. Scheduled to fight AJ Dobson, Gore shoulder injury. It's just tough sledding for the guy. The win over Josh Fremd, fantastic. If you guys go back and watch that, he got a choke on Josh Fremd that is a reminder why grappling is not soft. It's a reminder why grappling is as violent as anything else, right? He was hanging that man by his neck, choked him unconscious, let him go, and his head bounced off the canvas, man. Brutal choke from Tresean Gore. And he lost to Brian Battle. So if you go back and look, he beats Christian Eccles. That's not a bad win, guys. Christian Eccles, 7-3 in pro MMA, the vanilla gorilla, okay? Christian Eccles has a win over Pat Downey via knockout. Sat him down. So this guy, Christian Eccles, solid enough fighter. Tresean Gore was able to go out there and finish him, choke him. I believe the last time I checked, Tresean Gore was a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Yet he was still out there putting away Josh Fremd and putting away Eccles. So the guy has a good squeeze. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The guy's got power in his hands. The volume wasn't always there, right? The Brian Battle fight, he just got outworked. He got out hustled. He got outsmarted. And I think that when you look at what Tresean could do in this fight, who's the better athlete? Who's the more dynamic puncher? Who's the guy who can knock somebody the fuck out? Like, give me Tresean Gore in all those categories. If these guys went out there to box, I would take Tresean Gore hugely, honestly. But the difference is, like, Tricoli, I do think has a chance to go out there and maybe big brother him in the jiu-jitsu in the first round. Because if you look, the guy has, a couple of first round submissions on his resume, including when he came to the Contender Series. Let me see if I can find that. I think the result may have been overturned. But if you look at Tricoli, he's not a great fighter. And the fight that he had against Shara, I thought was not a good look. You'd like to see somebody be a little bit more competitive there. It was the Kenneth Berg fight. It was overturned to a no contest. But if we click on it, Tricoli won via neck crank in the first round and then pop positive. So the guy does have a good squeeze of his own. When he gets to the rear naked choke, when he gets to that back position, he's a big body. I think that's where he could have some success here. But Brian Battle struggled against Tresean Gore, man. He had to really earn that fight. He had to go out there and deal with a big swollen eye and all this stuff. And Brian's a dog. We know that. Brian's not going to quit on himself when shit goes sideways. This guy, Tricoli, man, I think he might look for the door. If Tresean Gore starts landing those big hammers, starts throwing at his head all night, I think Tricoli would not like that. So for me, Moyes says Berg quit. He did, but also, I think when you look at this guy, Tricoli, he's a big body. He can get on top of people, put him in some bad spots, but I don't see Tresean Gore as being, easy to get out of there. If Brian Battle can't finish you, I think Tricoli might struggle to finish you as well. So unless we see a shell of himself, right? Because the other thing about Tresean Gore is everything's speculation. What could you really say definitively about a guy who hasn't been competing lately? I think there's a lot more that we don't know here, but ultimately I like the big upside on, a guy like Tresean Gore long-term. He's still just 30 years of age. If he can get his health in order, the guy's an athlete. The guy's been around the game for a long time. He was on The Ultimate Fighter. So I think he could continue to make improvements. Biggest Norwegian hammer, no nail. Brutal. Tough sledding for our guy Berg from Norway. And everybody thought he was going to win. That's the other thing. So Tricoli has shown before he can go out there and spring the upset, catch people by surprise. So I wouldn't get too out of I just hit the back button on my stream, guys. I think that's the first time I've ever done that one. Excellent job by me. But guys, I want to thank you all for your time, for your effort, for your energy. If you have questions, comments, concerns, go ahead and fire those off down below in the chat. I really appreciate the support. If you guys are interested in becoming channel members, I have posted the entire navigation document for channel members as well as on Patreon. And I'm not done working tonight, guys. So I'm going to have the A-side report as well as the previous performance and odds range before I go to sleep. But in any case, the coffee's not done and the job's never finished. So thank you all for your support. Until next time, come back and we're going to have all the same fun later in the week for Bets and Banter. God bless you all, and I'll talk to you then. Take care, everybody.